Today on the Cameron Journal podcast, I am joined by Dr. Deborah Stern. She is the author of Communicating Courageously, Hear, Be Heard, and Connect in Your Closest Relationships. It says here, I provide an insightful exploration of the art of communication within intimate relationships. This book is a comprehensive guide to anyone seeking to enhance their communication skills and navigate conflicts more effectively. It offers a unique approach to understanding and mastering various styles of communication, complete with step-by-step instructions, practical tips, and engaging anecdotes. The book's innovative share, hear, care model serves as a roadmap to healthier, more fulfilling relationships. Well, I want to hear all about that, so we'll dig into that. So, welcome onto the Cameron Journal podcast, Dr. Stern. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you wrote this book?
So thanks for having me. My name is Dr. Debbie Stern, and I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I practice in the northwest suburbs of Chicago, and I've been practicing for over 30 years. I wrote the book because I have noticed over the years patterns that people present with in relationships, whether they come to me as a couple or a family or even an individual, they're struggling with relationships. And I found that over the years, I'm hearing the same things over and over and over. And I was finding what works or what things that would come to me that I would find myself saying the same things over and over to people. And so what I wanted to do after 30 years of working with people and having so much success is to reach out beyond my couch to the wider audience to be able to share my experiences and my successes with other people, both for people to pick up a book, just pick up the book for themselves to learn more about themselves and how they communicate and how they can improve, and also for the therapists to help increase their toolkit. Because many times in graduate school, psychologists, social workers, LCPCs, they don't necessarily learn a model for communication and how to work with their clients. So I was hoping to have a resource for other therapists to use to refer their clients to, and for any person really who wants to work on understanding themselves better in their relationships and improve on communications and their connections to be able to use this resource.
Excellent. Well, that certainly makes sense. So why don't you start us right off with your share, hear, care model? How does that work? What are we supposed to do?
Okay. So actually in the book, before I even teach the share, hear, and care model, I spent some time helping people understand their current styles of communication. Okay. So basically the first step in figuring how to change things is realizing where am I going wrong and why am I going wrong? Oftentimes people are raised in families or in their communities without this skill set. So we go around in life and we just communicate how we do, or sometimes we don't. And we stumble into problems and issues, and we feel disconnected and pained and strained in our relationships, and we don't know why. So before I even teach that in the model, I'll explain to you here, I take readers through the exact same steps I take my clients through. So if you're my client and you're sitting down with me, whether you come by yourself or with a sibling or a parent or a child or a spouse or a partner, we'll talk about understanding forms of communication. So I'll say, Cameron, what do you think I mean by passive communication? What is that? What does that look like in your life? Where do you see that in your world? And we define the form of communication, whether it be aggressive, passive aggressive, or assertive. We talk about what is it? Why do we do it? What are the advantages? What are the pros and what are the cons? What are the downsides? So as people reflect upon their own skill set or their own patterns, they start to see, oh, this is where I'm getting into trouble. Or this is why I do this, or this is why I do that. So by the time we get to the point where I'm teaching you my model, you have a better understanding of yourself. And you also have time to reflect upon how you may have come to these patterns. For example, if you're willing to share with me, in your family of origin growing up, what would you say was a style of communication? What was your experience growing up in your family?
I'm a bit of a unique situation. I grew up with narcissistic mother enabling stepdad, but he adopted me when I was 5, so I call him my dad because he's the only. I never met my father until I was 23. Long story. We're not going to get into it here. That's another show. But so because of that, the way our family system, I've done family systems therapy. Our family system is very unique, and I've had to modify it for my own mental health. My mom and I didn't talk for a year, and then when we re-engaged, I had to say, here are the ground rules, and if you're not okay with this, then I'm not going to work. I also joke that my mom and I's relationships works a lot better when we live about 1,000 miles apart, which is why they live in Denver and I'm in Wilmington. And I was in Seattle for 10 years. So it was a lot of my mother's very aggressive. She was a Karen before we had that term. Service people lived in fear of her. So because she was so kind of aggressive and out there, I tended to be a lot more passive, kind of take it on the nose, um, which presents interesting and unique challenges in the context of romantic relationships. And my girlfriend and I will probably be listening to this later. The in terms of I don't necessarily always stand up for myself when I should, and I just kind of put up with things until I can't take it anymore. And I'm also autistic, so then it kind of turns into an anger slash autistic meltdown. Like those things kind of like start merging together, sort of thing. So, my rule, what I have tried to do is to not let it fester. Like if there's a problem, talk about it today. Don't wait 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 year. If you have kind of address it, because that's not the world I came from. I
Right.
came from a world where things fest. This was my childhood. Things festered for a long time. There was a huge fight, usually between me and my mom, and then things were resolved with dad playing peacemaker, and then we kind of went on from there. So I have worked very, very hard to not do that pattern later in life, but I'm not perfect at it.
Right. Well, none of us are, which is why we need the book, right?
Yeah.
So is a prime example. So you could identify and realize looking back now as you became an adult and had started having relationships and realizing, wait a second, I'm holding things in until I melt down, whatever type of thing, it's an autistic meltdown.
Yeah.
Yeah, that probably came from your childhood because oftentimes if you're raised by a narcissist, there wasn't room for your feelings to be
No,
heard.
no, my feelings to this day don't matter.
Oh
Like,
man, exactly.
I was on my phone with my mom this afternoon. My feelings were not discussed.
They still don't have it. Exactly, exactly. So
Yeah.
I just came from a conference this weekend, the Psychotherapy Networker Conference, a symposium in DC. And I went to an entire seminar on narcissistic abuse and the fallout from narcissistic abuse. So it makes sense to me that you came to adulthood with this pattern, which you now can recognize looking back, that you would keep things to yourself because it didn't matter. But in relationships now as an adult, if you do that, one of the positives, right, would be that it avoids conflict in the immediate time. But the downside is that long term, it builds up, builds up, builds up till it blows up. Exactly. So that's the exact type of process that like you and I are talking about right now that I would talk with a client. That's what I do in the book. So in the book, literally, I don't know if you got a chance to look at the book yet, but in the book, there's a lot of self-reflection questions. So I start out
Yeah.
the book saying, what do you think passive communication means? Where does it show up for you? How's it working? How's it not working? So you have a chance as a reader to really go through your own life first and understand how you got where you got and why it's not working. Like
Well,
you
and I
already
think
have.
this is a great book if you're like in a romantic relationship. And my girlfriend and I do this sometimes. We will like do a book together. And we do this on road trips sometimes where we'll have 6 hours, nothing to do. I'm driving, she's in the passenger, she reads aloud, we answer questions, and we have amazing conversations. We had a great conversation in the middle of Indiana this summer. Because we were, going back and forth and answering and talking about these questions and all this type of thing. And so, yeah. And I think this book, because it's so big and has those questions, this is another, this is a good couples activity, as it were.
Yes, yes. Interestingly enough, so I wrote the book about any close relationship, right? But a lot of the work comes from my work with couples, but it works also with, well, I don't know if your mother is super narcissistic, if I work with her, she has to participate, but it works with other relationships besides just couples. But yes, absolutely work with a couple. In fact, in the book, so there's self-reflection, right? Then there's a bunch of content. And those first few chapters I talked about with the aggressive, passive aggressive, and assertive, what I do in the book to help readers relate to this, besides just looking at, well, how does it show up for you? Is
Right.
I give responses that I collected over 20, 30 years of my client work with what other people have said to the same questions. So you go through
Yeah,
and say, what did this person say about passivity? How did it work for them? So people, as they read it, can see, oh yeah, that reminds me of this, or that reminds me, and check it off, or make a note next to it. And then they have throughout the entire book, I call it From the Couch. And there's little vignettes of examples of what things that people have talked to me about that people are very relatable concepts that help you even more ground yourself in understanding what I'm talking about in these dynamics. Does that make sense?
absolutely.
So then when we get into the share here care model, which I didn't forget your question, as I teach each step in the model, there are practice exercises to apply the skills. And then after we go through that step, then we stop and self-reflect. How'd that go for you? Where'd you get stuck? What got in the way? Which is exactly what I do in session. I teach a skill, we work on it together, I model it, I help the clients through it. Then after we're done, I say, all right, what was it like for you just now to listen to your wife or listen to your mother? How was it, what was this? Tell me what was easy about it, tell me what was hard, where'd you struggle, what'd you get out of it? And when we do that, we really ground ourselves and the growth happens much more when we're constantly stopping to self-reflect and have insight.
Absolutely.
Okay, so after the first section of the book, by the chapter 4, I hope I have you're convinced that the assertive way is the way to go. The assertive form of communication is the share. That's how are we going to share what we feel? How are we going to say what we say? All right. And so what I've done over many years of looking at different models, trying things out for size, working with patients, is a script that I think works. And it's scripted. So the share script that I propose is I feel or I felt, and then in the blank we have a feeling word or two or three or four. I felt insulted, put off, and shut down. I felt embarrassed, humiliated, and disrespected. I felt sad and alone. Okay. So oftentimes people will say, I felt that you. That you is not a feeling. You probably know this from your work before. So you really
Yep.
are going to feeling words. So a lot of books on communication I found over the years will talk about what I'm talking about now in a paragraph or a chapter.
Yeah.
I take these little steps of communication. It's a whole book. I deeply dive into every segment of what you say and don't say and why. So, for example, the I feel part of the statement and the share statement, that's just one part of the 4-part statement. And I have all sorts of topics about what's going to happen in this one little part of the vignette, one little part of the structure. Identifying feelings, being careful to not. So it goes really far deep into that. And for people who will say, I'm not good at knowing my feelings, or I'm, not familiar with talking about them. If you're shut down a lot as a kid, number one, oftentimes you lose contact. You're like, I don't know what I feel. Oh, don't ask me. I've heard folks say before, I don't have feelings, Dr. Stern. And I say, yeah, you do. You just got cut off because, in fact, just a couple hours ago tonight, I had a gentleman very similar to your situation. I don't know about his parents, but he said basically, I learned very quickly growing up that my emotions, my feelings, my thoughts, and my ideas didn't matter. Say what you do growing up is you learn very quickly to push them down. It's not safe to have those feelings, let alone express them. So now we're here
Yeah.
and I'm saying, tell your wife how you feel. I feel, and it's like, you know, I don't know. And if I did know, I sure as heck am not going to tell you. There's a guardedness around. There's a fear around
Yeah.
putting it out there, right? So there's a huge piece just in the I feel. So back to the share statement. I feel or felt when. After the when is where you describe the situation, the trigger that made you feel that way. I felt ignored and disrespected when you didn't return my text in a timely manner. When you call me a name. So you then say the observable behavior that triggered the feeling. Okay. A lot of models start the same way. Some models say, when you didn't call me back, I felt. I say, no, no, no. Flip the script. The I's got to come first. And there's a whole discussion of why that happens in the book, why we say I first. So I feel when, because. The because is the explanation. Okay. If I want you to understand how I'm feeling, I have to explain it. So I would say, I felt um, blown off and upset when you didn't respond to my text in time because it seemed like you didn't think I mattered and didn't, you know how important it is to me to hear from you, XYZ.
Yeah.
So I felt or I feel when because, period. Sentence 2, I wish instead. That's where the person's asked to enunciate what they want instead. I wish instead you would have responded to me more quickly. I wish in the future you keep that in mind.
No,
Okay?
yes, and I think the for me, what is so great about that is there's a guidepost for the future because I will autistically write a new rule about how to handle that situation. So like autistic's like, oh my God, a rule. We will apply this across everything. We'll make this a new global standard. And and that is, I mean, is so that but I think it's important. But even for, you know, your typical, you know, neurotypical situation, I think filling that out and kind of having that script and those ideas to kind of bring forth something that isn't there, or on the opposite side, to maybe containerize things from getting out of control. I think that's a really helpful way of neutralizing the tension whichever way it's going.
Yeah, precisely. And to piggyback to what you're saying, not just people who are autistic, like a rule or like a guide. Especially men. Men say, "Oh, this is great. I know what to do next." Like, what do you want me to do? Like, it puts me all
Yeah,
out.
yeah,
And like
yeah,
as express containing goes, people like me who are verbose, as you can tell, may without a script go on and on and on and on. And then my listener shuts down, gets overwhelmed, right?
right.
So what I like about the script is that, and we'll talk about the listening end in a minute, but it's real predictable for the listener. It's chunks. So you felt when, because, and you wish instead. Then you, and I'm now listening for the feeling, the trigger, the reason, and the request. So it takes a very, can be a highly emotional and complicated situation, and it boils it down to just the basics and everything you need to know, and nothing more and nothing less. So that's a sure statement. And in the book, we talk about, I give tons of examples. Instead of saying it this way, you put it like this. And then there's a worksheet. Practice out. Think of some things you're wanting to say to someone, write it all out. Even now for me, and I do this for a living, and I wasn't shut down emotionally as a kid. I was encouraged to express myself, right? Now, something happens, I know I'm upset. It takes me a while to figure out the feelings, the trigger, and the reason. And I'm this is what I do for a living for 30 years. And it takes me a while. When it's my stuff, it takes me time. So if someone's new to this, it's for sure going to take them time. And there's all sorts of tips and guides just on that share statement. Okay, now we go into the next step. I'm the communicator and I'm sharing with you. I'm hoping, anyhow, that you're listening. Because if there's one thing I've heard over and over and over for 30 years in my life, even outside the office, is I just want to be heard. When something's important to you, when your feelings have been hurt, something to say, people want to be heard. So we need an active listener who cares and who's engaged. So the hear and the care steps are the listener steps. Now, people are going to find the share statement in itself sometimes challenging, especially certain people who are new to the process. I find the listening to be even harder. Because it's one thing to listen. If you come home and we're just buddies and you're telling me about your day at work, I can listen all day long. But you come home, and you're talking to me about something about me, something that I hurt
Yeah.
you, or I offended you, you're mad at me, it's a lot harder, right? So the hear step, so it's the share and the hear. The hear step is, the first step as a listener I want to do is I want to make sure I heard you correctly. So I'm going to say to you, so Cameron, what I heard you say is that you felt left out when I didn't include you at the party because you thought we were closer than that and that I cared more. And you wish instead I had included you to my invitation to my party. So I will say back to you what I heard you say in your words. Many models tell, give a summary. I say, no, 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 no. People choose their words wisely and for a reason. When you're the listener, you were the goal is to say it back as best you can in that person's words. Take them literally for their words. Okay.
No,
So
no, I mean, I think that's the biggest, I think I've noticed having been in the communicative arts for since I was 17 years old and I was on terrestrial radio, is and I even know that I definitely know this in romantic relationships. I can say certain things, but you hear something else. And I know I do the same thing as well. In fact, I had a thing with a my pub I work I have a publishing company and I also work at the same company, and I was saying, you said X, Y, and Z, but I heard A, B, C, and D, sort of thing. And I think I think that using it in their own language, and then I think redefining the terms of the discussion to the actual words used, not what you heard, not what your brain very quickly reinterpreted what they said, changes the frame.
Yes. And so, number one, you'll see if when you practice the skills with your partner that when you have to listen, this is your job as a listener, you listen differently. Now I'm like hyper focused on what are his words because I need
Yeah.
my job is saying back to you. And so it helps you tune out some of the noise because when we listen to people and we're confrontation, we oftentimes have our own reactions, interpretations. We're planning what we're going to say next. You have to quiet all that down and be present and mindful and engaged to hear the words. And then you're making sure you get it right. You got it right. And sometimes you're not going to get it right. It's hard to remember. By the way, you get to
Yes.
notes. So in
Yeah.
this here section, it's a whole chapter on just this little piece because there's so much that goes on into that first step of listening. It's not easy to do. Okay, so the here statement is so after you say what I heard you say is you felt when, because, and you wish instead. Then you say, did I get that right? If I did, great, I'm on to the next step. If I didn't, the Cameron, I forgot what you said about the second feeling you mentioned. Can you say it again? It's not a quiz. You take as
Right.
much time as you need until you get it right. And you'd be amazed how many people in my office, their whole shoulders drop, their face melts. They may even reach touch a person's hand because they feel so relieved that the person heard them, maybe for the first time. And by the way, at that point, I haven't even asked the person if they understand. I haven't asked them to be empathic in response. I haven't said to you, they haven't agreed. All they did was repeat back the words and their language, and the whole thing shifts. Unbelievable to
I'm
me.
I'm not surprised you say that, and I'm not saying that this is what I'm about to say that it sounds like, but one of the things there was this psychopath who wrote a book on how to manipulate people and convince them of things because he was naturally very good at it. And one of the things he said was to, besides personality mirroring and all this type of thing, is to talk in the same words that people are using, and people will kind of be putty in your hands at that point. And he said it doesn't matter from the janitor to the CEO, it works across all income tax brackets, sort of thing. Not saying that's what we're doing here, but people will really, it affects people in a very deep way, is my point.
100%. In fact, it's interesting you mentioned that about the sociopath. Not that I'm making a sociopathic reference, but there's a little. I have little like little sidebars, like little like topics that come up, in the book, whatever. That just like, oh,
Yeah,
think about this. And in the chapter about assertive communication, there's a thing about like take off your attorney's hat or your salesman's hat. I've
yeah,
worked with salesmen before. They tell me, oh, Dr. Stern, I learned this at my work. The difference is we learn how to listen this way, but the difference is we were learning how to listen so we can manipulate the customer to do what we want to get to close the deal.
right.
So the similarities in how you listen that way, but it's the purpose that you use it for that's different. Or an attorney
Yes,
closely to figure out how to flip the argument, right?
right.
So exactly. So that's the here step. The third step is the care step. So I say, okay, now you heard it. Now we know you heard the words. And now comes the care part. I point to my chest, the care part. That is where the heart comes in. Now I'm asking you, you've sat on your hands already and try to quiet your own thoughts and reactions. And that's not really what happened or whatever. What about what I feel? You got all that quieted down as a listener. You've reflected back what they said to you, then you got it right. Now, can you understand that person's feelings? Do you get why they feel that way? Do you understand? Do you get it? If you do, you say, Cameron, I can understand why you felt left out when you didn't get an invitation to my party. Or I might say, I don't get that. Can you help me understand why that insulted you so much? So I either tell you, basically, I get it, in so many words. I ask you if I don't get it to help me get it. Or if I still don't get it, I may just say, I can't totally get that, but I hear and validate and acknowledge that that's how you feel. That's the care step. So there's more steps to resolution beyond that, right? Because we don't
Right.
stop there. But the reason the model stops there, because I could have added some fancy rhyming words for the rest of it, is because that's the basis of the communication. The respond and resolve, which come next, I outline because it's helpful to kind of see how it flows. I didn't make that stuff up. I'm just observing how that happens. But the most important part of communication is how you communicate it. If you want to be heard, the way you say it makes a difference to help your listener not be defensive and be open. And the way it's listened to and responded to before you even get to the other person's point of view is critical. So share a sort of it's the share script. I felt when because I wish instead. The here is what I heard you say, and the here is I get it. And if I don't get it, I at least validate and acknowledge it's real for you.
No, absolutely. No, I think that's very, I think if you can start on that basis, and I found this as well in all sorts of relationships, even in business. If you really sit down with people, the big issues you think are big issues aren't as big issues always as you think they are. It's usually because someone's not being seen and heard.
Thank you.
Um, and when you sit down and say, okay, I hear you, you're saying this is all this type of thing, then you can then find out, oh, this isn't really such a big thing. They really just wanted their concerns addressed, sort of thing. And I'm the same way. One of the worst days of my life, I've never talked about this on the show before, but one of the worst days of my life was when I realized no one was ever going to care about my feelings or want to hear them. And that was not a fun 3 days, but on the other side of it, I was able to just kind of deal with the fact that no one, I'm like, I have a lot of feelings, I have a lot of thoughts. Nobody's interested, and that's okay. Um, and I can just, sort of handle that, and so now oftentimes in situations where things go wrong or things are difficult or whatever have you, I will have all that and just be kind of like, put that aside. No one wants to hear it and no one cares. All this sort of thing. And then sometimes in different situations, when people, it comes back up or there's a greater problem, sometimes I can return to it and say, well, I actually really felt X, Y, and Z. We're just not talking about that right now, sort of thing. Um, I don't presume that this is the most healthy way to deal with this situation. But it saved me from having a lot of unnecessary conflict with other people because it's not that I had a problem with them or what happened. I just wanted someone to say, yeah, that sucked for you and I'm sorry, which almost never happens. Nobody's that invested in me. That's okay. Um, but it is kind of a wonderful thing to, when people have that chance to give those things that voice, um, to be able to do it.
And I find too the whole really premise of the book is that well, when all the couples that I see, the most what do you think? What would you guess to be the two biggest issues couples present to therapy with?
Well, people get divorced over infidelity and money, so I would presume those would start out in therapy first.
So most people say that, or money, or fidelity, or parenting. The two
Yeah.
things are the most with relationships that come to see me: communication, connection. Those,
Hmm.
and what I found in my work is that those two things are intimately entwined. So if we're not communicating, whether we're passive and we don't bring things up, passive aggressive, aggressive, we get into these cycles and conflicts, and we're not communicating, then we lose a sense of connection. If no one's talking, you go further and further apart until the rubber band snaps. And if you're beating the crap out of each other when you're arguing, passive aggressively, aggressively, it just rips the fabric of the connection, right? And then once you're not
Right.
connected, then heck, if I'm going to put my feelings on a platter and be vulnerable and say I felt insulted when, that's not safe. So communication and connection are entwined. So if I can help a couple through the structure of my model communicate safely or to have the courage, it's called communicating courageously for a reason, have the courage to communicate this way, have the courage to listen this way, then they can reconnect. And they can sustain connection. The idea is how do you sustain connection through conflict and differences? And this is the way you do it. By how you say it and how you hear it.
No, and I think especially in a romantic context, but even among friends, I find something will have happened. Someone will have gone to a place emotionally. It doesn't get talked about at the moment in time, but there's a problem sort of thing. Um, one of the things I try to practice to do is to watch out for that and address it in proper time, place, and manner. To say, I heard you say that, or I think this whatever happened. Now let's, revisit that sort of thing and see, kind of where we're at, about all of this. Um, and I find that is incredibly helpful because otherwise stuff piles up pretty fast. And it starts popping out in other places where it doesn't ordinarily pop up.
Yes, you'll see that when you read the aggressive, the passive communication chapter. I find in relationships this happens, parent children. I find especially this generation, this Gen Z generation. I know we're all empowered now to have boundaries, like you said with mom. Like these are the boundaries, whatever. And if you can't do it this way, we're not going to do it. It's got to be healthy. And I think that's great in that generation. But there's also a lot of cutoffs happening, and the cutoffs in the relationships are happening because people aren't using the skills. And if people could have the skills to communicate this way, I think we'd be able to save a lot of relationships
No,
and
I mean,
issues.
hear me, and my mom wouldn't mind me saying this. So I didn't talk to her for all of 2016. We reconnected in the fall of 2017. And it and it's now 2024. So it's been 7-ish years. Um, it took a lot of those early conversations were very tough. They were short. Um, because she doesn't really engage with this stuff. I was kind of the one in therapy at the time, gaining the skills, doing the work to do this. Um, and it's been a lot of really tough conversations. And I'm proud to say I think her and I have said everything we need to say, and I think either one of us could die tomorrow and not feel regret. Um, and and it was a very tough thing to have those conversations that allowed that connection to kind of refoster. And now, because I live alone and all this type of thing, we text each other once a day, just kind of remind ourselves that we're still here. And someone said, "How's that possible?" I said, "It took 7 years and a lot of work."
Okay,
And
and
a
you're
lot
right.
of very tough conversations and going over stuff about her and her mother back to the Kennedy administration. That's no joke. We talked about stuff that happened in 1963. I mean, that's how far back we had to go. But we're in a place now where we can do that every day and it doesn't become toxic. That takes time.
Right, right. And I want to point out to you, and you said you're the one that was in therapy, that even though this book is really designed for people to work on with someone they care about together, like actually it's for two people, you don't need two people, and
Yeah,
it's not going to be as safe or as easy to do this if you're the only one doing the work, because if you're putting yourself out there and using a beautiful share statement and listeners slamming you down or not open, it's really tough. And sometimes it's not worth doing. It's not safe to do. But
right.
even one person can change the dynamic. If you start listening to mom in a different way and hearing her list differently, or you start talking to her differently and you're managing your emotions and you're more insightful and aware how you're communicating or how to set boundaries in a healthy way, you can affect a change.
And for me, that was so huge is I got to a place where she could say stuff and it didn't immediately put me in a different place. I could just kind of pack it up and be kind of like, okay, we'll just take that in and put that in that box there, and we'll take that and put that in that, and we'll readdress the bit by all this type of thing. And then sometimes, and this was probably the hardest one for me, is I had to say, all right, this conversation's over. I'm going now. And this is why it's good for us to live apart. Because I can like and say, yeah, I'm not gonna engage on this further. Thank you. Goodbye. Talk later, sort of thing. And that one was the hardest one to do because that was not the family system I came from. You know, it was talk until your legs give out. My legs did give out one time when I was a child. I mean, that was, because it was a whole part of the cycle. It was kind of your punishment sort of thing, was now you have to endure the emotional detritus that you have caused sort of thing. Um, and I don't do that. I will do it to a very small point and then I don't do it anymore.
We're talking about boundaries, and those are so important. The last part of the book, after I discuss the share here, and then there's also a respond and resolve section, which is important too, but the model's not named after that part of the book. Then the last part of the book talks about tools and techniques, because this stuff sounds like, oh, just follow the formula. This is cool. It's not easy to do. It's a lot of hard work. And so the last section of the book talks about tips and tools like the timeout technique, which is so critical because, what's the biggest thing that gets in the way of these communications? Emotions. And emotions that
Right.
can be, every which direction take us off course. So There's tools. Again, most books will talk about timeouts in a paragraph or two. I have a whole chapter. Who does it? How do you do it? What don't you do? I mean, it's step by step and all sorts of tools. One other thing I'll mention that I designed with this, my mission and my vision for this book, and was to get the resources into people's hands. Also for my clients to take home with them to go home and practice things. But what I wanted to have happen was when I be in session, clients say, "Hold on, Dr. Stern, I got to write this down. Hold on, hold on." Maybe taking notes. What do I say next to now
Yeah.
they have the book, but on my website, there is a page you can unlock on the website. There's a QR code in the beginning of the book, and you can go to the website, unlock it with your phone, and unlock the resources that are in the book. So anytime you see a chart or a graph or a reminder in here, there is a matching PDF on the website. So
Yeah.
if you're talking with your partner or your mom, and you're like, "Oh, I want to use that share script. I forgot what comes next." You grab your phone, you open it up, you pop it, and it's right on your phone.
No, that's fantastic. That's fantastic.
I was going to develop an app, but that ended up being a really costly venture. So I did it on the website
Yeah.
instead. And so for my clients here, actually, I printed it out here. So my clients, when they come here, will get like a little, this is like a packet, a PDF packet of what's online. And then there's all the different pages in here, the different, the share script, and there's different like strategies to calm yourself down in timeout, or a bunch of feeling words. So anyhow, there's resources here too.
No, no,
So
I think having one of the biggest lessons I learned in a romantic context was not every issue can be resolved in one conversation. And sometimes you have to take time away and revisit stuff. And sometimes it takes multiple conversations to come together on something. And for me, the biggest one was just because an issue is not resolved does not make that a good time to make decisions. So if you have a problem, that's not a good time to decide about, breakup, divorce, leave it. That's not the time to have that conversation with yourself, sort of thing. Um, and also to give stuff time and emotional processing. One of the issues between me and the girlfriend is she grew up in a very different environment. I grew up in like Auschwitz. She grew up in like a circus. I grew up in I mean, I grew up fundamentalist Baptist evangelical. Everything was very tight and controlled and regulated. My dad's ex-military. I mean, everything, so it literally was just, I'm kind of like, I'm waiting for Dr. Mengele and the boxcars out front. Like, that's how it kind of felt later on. And and she grew up in like this. I've met her parents, and they're old hippies, and I love them, but they are crazy. And so she grew up in this chaotic environment where things were fluid, things were changing. You process stuff on the go, on the fly. I grew up in a system where if there was a problem, everything in our household came to a screeching halt until the problem was resolved. And so I'm over here being like, what do you mean you want to go to dinner? We're fighting, but I don't have time. I'm not thinking about eating. I'm not thinking about unloading the dishwasher. I'm not thinking about laundry. No, we have a problem. Everything must stop until the problem is resolved. And for her, she's kind of like, yeah, yeah, we have a problem anyway. The laundry needs to be changed. The floor needs to be mopped. The dog needs to, and I'm kind of like, no, 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 no. So it, long time, many discussions later, I have learned that not just because there's a problem doesn't mean life has to come to a screeching halt to solve it. And sometimes not everything can be resolved in that container anyway. So sometimes you have to go on and go to work and do things, and it can take two or three conversations to come together on something. Um, that was for me, thinking of family systems that was a big change. And it is sometimes hard. It sometimes does bother me, but I realize, yeah, you can't make long-term decisions on short-term feelings, and not everything can be processed in 10 minutes.
And what you're describing too is that people can have differences in their processing through conflict,
Mm,
not only based on their family of origins. Your systems were obviously super duper like opposite, but also
right.
based on personalities, right? So when we talk
Yeah.
about, I almost always have one person in the room.
Oh,
Dr. Stern, thank God that you're telling my XYZ spouse, partner, whatever, because I've been running these timeouts. I need a timeout. I get overwhelmed. I need to shut down. I need some time to process. And the other partner says, like, Dr. Stern, the person walks out, never. So like people have different temperaments or different tolerances for conflict, And when we talk about it this way, and we give it a name, and we have rules and boundaries around how that is managed, then both parties learn to see it as a life raft. I'm
Yes.
not saying time out because I'm blowing you off, cutting you off, and saying we're game over. We're having a way now that we know when we get caught here or stuck somewhere where we're not resolving and we're going in circles. I'm getting too upset. You're getting too upset. We're getting off topic, whatever it may be. We have a vehicle to go, okay, that timeout that we learned, and we're gonna take the time out. And I have actually step one, step two, walk away from the situation, calm yourself down. There's all these different steps you do, but all these types of rules and regulations around it that make it a safe container to help people come back to the conflict, to take the time that they need.
And yes, and I am so glad you said that because I think for me, as a survivor of trauma, for her as a survivor of trauma, that whole taking time out thing can also feel incredibly unsafe at first. That was my problem, is that felt so unsafe to be kind of like, I can't have a problem with you in like the household because you're going to blow up at me. Something bad will happen, and all I'm going to do is sit in the corner and wait for the bad thing to happen because that's what I came from. Um, and for her, I think there was a lot of overwhelm of I wanted a resolution, I wanted it now, and we were going to talk about it until it was to death. And that was way too much of like her dad energy. And I don't want to be like her dad. Like that was like way too much like what her dad did. So we kind of learned to become like if we're not getting anywhere, it's not productive to say, okay, we're gonna table this for now and come back to it later. And it was very hard because feels very unsafe. But once you kind of get over that unsafe hump, it is so much better. And then sometimes you find, and I find this for myself, a little bit time later, emotions have cooled, all this type of thing. It's like, all right, now we can talk. Now we can have a real conversation where I can hear you and all this sort of thing.
Exactly the point. And again, just like you and your girlfriend, almost, I think there was one time in 30 years that the both people had the same style. Almost always, like opposites attract, almost always it's that way. And
Yeah,
for you, it's unsafe. People also tell me that they feel anxious because they feel like if we walk away now, we won't ever come back to it. And or
right.
you feel abandoned. You walk out the door, I feel you're like you just left me, right? And that repeats people's trauma as well. So, or the person's like overwhelmed by, so it's like we oftentimes have these conflicting approaches, but when both people learn in the book or in my office that like, hey, this is for both of you. I know right now it feels upsetting to have to walk away and shut it down when you're kind of all in and you want to get through it right away because you can't stand the sense of that we're in a conflict together. Promise you, let's take the time. We'll set a time to come back. We have vehicles and rules to follow about it. You're going to feel better when you come back. You're
Yeah,
going to become, and I say, watch, rinse, repeat. My family, we take the time out. We come back when everybody's ready. We usually start out pretty good again, and it may unravel again. Okay, take a time out again. There's no limits to timeouts.
yeah. No, no,
It's
it is very important. I think also, and I find this even in business, the impossible thing yesterday might become possible today, or, the issue that we had wasn't really and was not necessarily really an issue, but in the context of that moment with things that had been said, it was one straw piled on the camel too many sort of thing. But now that we've unloaded the camel, things are better now, sort of thing. Yeah, and it's good.
Yeah, and sometimes you realize too, I say to people, you have to come back to the game. You have to get back to the floor, finish the game. It's not game over. But sometimes you're going to find when you take the time out and you come back, you're like, wait, what were we even arguing about? Oh, I was just tired or hungry, or you're like, you know what? It was a non-issue. We were both crabby for the moment. But
Yeah,
otherwise, usually if one of the other person feels it's important, you come back to it. But yes, absolutely when you're calmer, you can see things better, you calm yourself down. It's virtually impossible to do a good I feel statement, a good share statement when you're too emotional. You can't think straight.
right.
And you don't hear well when you're too worked up. So both parties have to be in a good space to do the work. And this is really hard work to do. And so there's tools, there's a whole chapter on the timeout technique. And there's other chapters about just like what it takes and why it's worth it. Because I hope people find the inspiration in reading the book because it is kind of overwhelming when you try these exercises, especially for the first time. It's really hard work to do. But when you read the stories from the couch of patients who have done this work with me and have had success, and you see what benefit comes from being heard and hearing the other person and connecting, then you realize it's all worthwhile.
Absolutely.
Really willing to say.
Absolutely. Well, we're close to time. And this has been so amazing and so informative. And I love your book. And I was looking over stuff. And like I said, I'm pretty sure that this will be our next couples project. So that's fun. We'll be doing more with your stuff. Um, why don't you tell us where we can buy it and where we can keep track of you online?
So it is now for sale on Amazon. Just been on the market just for a couple of weeks. So it's communicating courageously, hear, be heard, and connect in your closest relationships. Amazon.com. I also have a website in support of the book, and the website is I don't know if we put it in the chat or not. Did I just do it in the chat or just to
No, just say it out loud for the recording.
so the website is Dr. Deborah Stern. So DrDeborahStern. So drdeborahstern.com.
Yes. And we'll have links for that. And yeah, it's very good. Excellent. Thank you so very much. Thank you for writing this and helping us communicate courageously.
A pleasure. On the website as well, just so you know, you can go to the Amazon link there. And also you can sign up to follow me. And I'll be having certain things in the future, like other podcasts, hopefully like yours, and possibly some blogging and other tips and events and trainings like me coming down the line.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter. And we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast.